Well, appreciate you taking some time for us. It's a real thrill. Been a big fan of your work since I was a little boy. And The Night Siren. It's really
Yeah.
a very special album, Steve. If you can, try to explain how you came to produce what is an unusual record, and it appears to take on human division by countering it with messages of unity, and then in some cases, utilizing some of the more profound conflicts like the Arab-Israeli one to try and overcome difference.
Yeah, that's right. So basically, it's an album. We didn't start out with the idea of a concept, but we just found we were getting more interested in current affairs. And my wife suggested with the first track, I had the music for it, and she suggested that we had the opening line of Behind the Smoke. And I said, oh, you're talking about refugees, aren't you? And she said, yes. And as you know, we have a huge crisis in Europe at the moment with this. So in a way, it's social comment, and we couldn't help being aware of the fact that both my ancestors and hers escaped from pogroms in Poland in the late 1800s and made their way over to England. And so without that, I think neither of us would be here. So we on my mother's side, and on her father's side, we seem to share a common Jewish ancestry. Then my father's side, of course, is completely different. So we're completely mixed. We're mongrels. We're not pure of race at all. But it was that really kicked off the tone to the album, and then. There was another idea we were kicking around, the idea of a peace song that talked about war, and also with the idea of the chorus on that track, West to East, the idea of there being enough for everyone's need but not enough for everyone's greed, and much where we had Kobe and Mira of the band Orphaned Land, he of Israel, she of Palestinian origin. Ironically, he lives in Jaffa, which is a Palestinian town. It's an old Arabic town, but you can walk very freely from Tel Aviv from one to the other.
Right, they're next door to each other.
They are next door to each other, and as if it's the most natural thing in the world. So there are places where this kind of stuff goes on. I don't understand why they can't manage to achieve that in the other territories. I think it's very sad. The state of Israel. I don't mean the state of Israel. I mean the state of the politics of Israel. But that's just part of it. And obviously we're concerned with extremists leading both sides, and there seems to be a swing towards all of that right now, extreme politics and the politics of the right. And we just know it's going to lead us to disaster. But over and above that, the album, essentially, there are many branches to it. So some of the songs are about that. Not every song is.
Right.
There are some love songs. It's an extremely varied thing. Essentially, you could say it was world music without attempting to be too ethnic, just by virtue of the fact that we have so many people from all over the world who happen to be on the album. We didn't start out this way, it just worked out because of friends. So we have a number of Hungarians that have been involved with it, a man from Azerbaijan, Malik Mansurov. I've been working with Icelandic people, and we have Gulli Bream playing drums on a couple of the tracks, who's from Iceland. And there are various territories where people are represented, and if not the actual people, then it's instruments from these areas. There is a track called Inca Terra, which is basically Peruvian influenced with Peruvian instruments at the beginning, which then becomes orchestral down the line. There are some psychedelic moments with sitars and electric guitars. It's extremely varied. There's some flamenco influence, and stylistically, it just keeps genre hopping
That's a good way of describing it. And I was going to say,
Yeah.
it's not just international cats that you've got, but you've got the nice sound of different, like on Martian Sea. I'm thinking, is that you on Oud on that one?
Well, actually, Martian Sea has got several things. It's got guitar. It's also got it's got sitar, but it's got sitar samples twinned with electric sitar, sitar guitar basically. So it's not the first time I've mixed those two. You get the leading edge of one and
Right.
the sound of the other to make the samples more realistic. I like straps with things. I don't think I can sit down and play the real thing. But I love the sound of it. So we've got something very authentic as regards that.
And you know what else is? There's a real feel that people who are fans of the kind of the rock epic, a song that will move through many different passages, utilizing many different kinds of things. One that really caught my ear was 50 Miles from the North Pole, which has that kind of feel, and very spacey, very catchy at the same time, very simple at times, and then heavy. Is that a message about the state of destruction we're causing the Earth?
No, you're the second person to ask me that. That's very interesting. When I was doing 50 Miles from the North Pole, it was a very personal track, and I thought, I'm the only person who's going to like this. But it has been attracting interest, and I do believe we're going to do a video for it. We were talking to someone today about that. Basically, it was impressions of Iceland. I don't think there was an ecological angle to it. I think it was more mystical, and I was trying to combine the idea of cold climate and cold-sounding guitar. In other words, spy guitar, retro-sounding, the stuff that you get with spy movies, with Len Dayton, with the James Bond stuff.
Peter Gunn theme kind of feel.
Sorry?
Like Peter Gunn theme kind of feel.
Yeah, a little bit like that. Yeah, the kind of guitar that you associate with either late 1950s or early 1960s. Deliberately retro in that way. But then there are other moments sonically that happen within the track. There's a trumpet solo which is twinned with didgeridoo, which was just done entirely free, and then we added drums afterwards. It's not actually in time at all, but in a way it's kind of got what we call drag timing, something which deliberately plays late. And it's not the first time I've worked with Ferry Kovacs doing this kind of thing. He also plays violin, not on this album, but I've used stuff that he does because he does this thing of deliberately playing out of time. In other words, to play after the event, to play after the beat, so much so that it all becomes floaty, and that's part of his style. And it's very beautiful, and it's very characterful.
Well, you have quite a few of those sort of dreamlike qualities. Other Side of the Wall caught me that way. But you know what else? When you were talking about the different instrumentation, for fans of your incredible guitar gift that we've all been blessed to enjoy for so many years, there's some great acoustic work, Anything But Love. Not only is the message in there one that's very powerful, but the guitar work is it's a different whole side of you than many other tracks on the record.
I think it probably is. I got more and more interested in flamenco stuff, and particularly the aspect of the percussive nature of flamenco, where you're playing very, very hard. You're playing flat out, and the body of the guitar is used as a drum as well. So I've got several tracks of that. It sounds, at its best, to be honest, it sounds biggest in 5/1, and then you get guitars coming at you from all sorts of angles, and that's even before it goes electric. So it goes from acoustic to electric, and so the dynamic increases as the track goes, and then it goes into a more kind of I keep using the word psychedelic. I very much like the sort of free playing of people in the 1960s, where you'd hold a note and let it go into feedback and let it just hang there and go, so that it's not always like the modern guitar solo, blisteringly fast runs punctuated by motorbike noises, all coming from the guitar.
Right.
Very, very good. Guitars do that very well. But then there's other approach that I'm interested in. It doesn't always have to be speedy.
No, I love that. And I mean, that's part of what I think draws people to cats like yourself, at least through the years. You've been able to dabble in what is psychedelic, and there's nothing wrong with using that word. It's not a bad word, Steve.
It's not a bad word. No, there's a lot of psychedelic stuff that was very good. So a very creative time, I think, the 1960s. Sonically very interesting. And you've got all the developments for guitarists. Things started to happen in the mid-1960s, basically. Had distortion, sustain, guitars sounding like voices, and pre-synthesizer stuff. So yeah, I was born in 1950, which means I was a teenager in the 1960s. A very good time to be listening to radio. Very good time to be a listener to other people.
No question about that, and that's probably a good segue into thinking about you as backing into your life and what you just mentioned when you grew up. There are two folks who kind of escape the whole guitar rock sound, but Bach and Mario Lanza both factored into your influences at a young age, and I've read still do. If you can explain.
Well, I think that when I was a child, when I was very small, I remember hearing Mario Lanza's voice on the radio, and I just used to fall over and roll around on the floor when I heard his voice. I just to go into ecstasy with it, and it's such a full sound. And even now, when you hear it, you can hear the walls ringing in the studio when he was recording his stuff. So that was a phenomenal talent.
Was that radio that you were getting it on, or somebody's collection?
Sorry, video? Did you say? Well, yeah. The movies, you can hear that when he plays the great Caruso, and other times when you listen to the records when he's opening up, suddenly there's something going on which is extraordinary. I mean, I don't think I've ever heard a louder singer.
That's so funny. We just had I don't know if you ever remember the guy Graham Bonnet, who was a singer in Rainbow for a record, he was a wonderful guy, really talented singer, but he was crediting Mario Lanza and his loud voice for influencing him to be a singer. So I guess I was asking, how were you getting exposed to these forces at a young age?
Well, British radio, there were only really two stations you could listen to. You had the Home Service, which was basically current affairs and news, and the Light program, and any kind of music was on that. If you wanted to hear other stations, you had to tune in to France, Germany, Belgium, Luxembourg, which took over much later on. In fact, we got most of our pop music from Luxembourg, and the signal rather strangely was being beamed from England over to Luxembourg back again because there was some kind of anomaly. It meant the signal was very weak and it would come and go, but nonetheless, that's where we heard most pop music. You just couldn't get it on the Light program. You couldn't get music programs, and it sounds crazy now. This went on for many, many years, even though the Beatles were selling billions of records. You had this reluctance on the behalf of the British government to deregulate radio, and I think they imagined that there would be a revolution if they did this. So, as indeed there was, but perhaps it wasn't the kind of revolution that
they thought might come. Right?
That might come. It wasn't blood in the streets.
Right.
It was stuff that was going on with the ears. And the other person you asked me about was Bach, and I remember hearing in 1965. Segovia plays Bach. The year was very important. A friend of my mother's, a very kind lady, said, "Oh, if you're interested in guitar, I've got this record. You might be interested in it." And from the very first note I heard Segovia play, I was absolutely captivated, and it seemed absolutely stunning. And I never really tire of it. It's such a lovely thing, and I've recorded many of those pieces myself.
Well, that's one of the things that when you listen
Yeah.
to this record, and again, it's Steve Hackett, the Night Siren, brand new record that is just filled with so many different flavors. It's hard to keep track of, from the opening jam on there that we were talking about, Behind the Smoke, very reminiscent of
Yep.
Zeppelin's Kashmir, to much more acoustic tracks like the one we were talking about, Anything But Love, which also,
Yep.
what's kind of neat about that, just that on the note, as you were talking about, you as a youngster, what's cool about that one track and about the record is that one features your sister-in-law Amanda on it. You've also got your wife and brother joining you on there. So there's just that's a real that's not it's not you're not the only cat who does things like this, but that certainly separates you from many other musicians. It's something of a family affair.
Well, in a way, yes. There's the family aspect. I mean, I'm lucky to be blessed with very talented members of the family. John is a phenomenal flute virtuoso, and Amanda, my wife's sister, has got a great voice and comes up with many really great vocal ideas. So I like recording with her very much. And Jo is a little bit more reluctant to record. She says she has all these great ideas, and then she'll say to me, "Oh, you sure you really want me to sing along with something?" I say, "Yes, and it makes a difference." And when we mix it all together, we get a choir, and it's a very nice, lovely mixture. It's not the first time, not the first album
Right.
we've done this on,
Exactly.
but it's a great effect. I love doing it.
No, I mean, and then it's got to be a special way of doing music that is. That's why I mention it. So when folks are maybe digesting this album, they'll appreciate that it's a lot of things coming together on many levels. And when you talk about family, the band that you're most associated with, I don't know if you would think of them like family per se, but Genesis is that group. There's a fantastic story. I never knew this until this studying for this interview. If you don't mind, tell the story of how you placed an advertisement in Melody Maker and who took the time to reply.
Well, this was 1970, and Peter Gabriel called me up. I think he liked the tone or the nature of the ad, which was very idealistic. I was looking for a band that was interested in going beyond existing stagnant music forms, and I think that was what got him, really. But for him, I wouldn't have joined Genesis, I suspect.
And that leads to you coming into the band. So what does he do? He calls you. How does somebody? Because that was a long time ago.
He called me up and he said, "Oh, we are doing a concert at it's a free lunchtime concert on Christmas Day in London's Lyceum. Perhaps you'd like to come and see us." So I went to see them. They had another guitarist with them at the time, and I thought, oh well, if these guys are interested, I might be able to add something here. And then he, instead of me auditioning in front of the rest of their band, and they'd already been through about 40 people to get to the point they were, and they weren't really happy. They came over to see me. And I played them a few things through with my brother playing flute, me playing guitar, a few written ideas, some lyrical stuff, some atonal stuff, some blues, and Pete said he was interested in the lyrical stuff, so they thought they could use that, but possibly not the other two things. But I gather he'd probably being very diplomatic. Tony was there as well, and Tony didn't say a word. He let Pete say everything. So it's quite strange, really. I thought, well, the other guy's not saying anything. And then 6 months after I joined the band, listen to this one, he said, "Oh, I really like what you played on that day." 6 months later, it takes that long. It's like Lord of the Rings. It's like speaking tree, isn't it? In
Right.
tree language, it takes ages.
Well, I mean, it also says a lot about who was who in the band in terms of perhaps hierarchy.
Yeah. Well, Pete was very forthright, and indeed, when you came to know Tony, he was very forthright within the group. But to strangers, perhaps, you'd have no idea. You might assume he was a very quiet man. In fact, anything but.
Well, you know what's also kind of makes that whole, I mean, there's many layers to what makes that band special, especially that period of it. But one of them would be, this is a group that had unusual concert theatrics, and they were doing it at a time before many other bands. So in a lot of ways, not only was Genesis extraordinarily pioneering with their progressive rock sound, but another aspect that makes them pioneering was that visual presentation. When you first got involved, how much of that was occurring? And if you can kind of, since it's radio, paint a little picture of the initial theatrics that you recall being surrounded by, and maybe your impression of it.
Well, I remember saying to the band, we need to get our own light show. We need to be able to control the environment. It's so important when you're doing a show to be able to have, the lights an integral part. I also had seen a couple of bands that used Mellotron, and I knew that was a mighty beast. I knew we had to have one. And then Pete, it came to a point, we'd done one album, and we were playing all over, but a lot of audiences hadn't really cottoned onto us properly, and we certainly weren't getting that much press. And then one day we were doing the Foxtrot album, and Pete showed up with a whole bunch of costumes. He didn't run it by anyone. He just decided to put these things on, during the course of the thing. And then we suddenly got a front page of the all-important Melody Maker, so no one could really argue with that. He didn't say, "Oh, what do you think? Do you think I'll do this?" He just did it. And at that point, he'd really, I think he was just a little bit ahead of Bowie in terms of that. But he was dressing up. He was living the songs. He was depicting the action very often.
Using makeup, so many things that just changed.
Makeup, doing a silhouette of himself with bat wings and day glow eye makeup, and again, the mixture of that with the Mellotron, the eeriness of that. You had this kind of enigmatic quality to the start of the show. As I say, once we acquired our own light show, and we were using UV lights, I think the presentation was all important. You could tell from the very opening note that it was no ordinary down-home rock and roll band. It just wasn't that. Not that there's anything wrong with that. I love rootsy rock and roll, love it, and I'm a big Stones fan still. I love their latest album, but it's very rootsy. It's that's not what Genesis was doing. Genesis was about exploring. On one level, I think the generation gap. On another level, it's a storyteller band, exploring, I think, European roots rather than Anglo-American. I think we were coming from a different place. There was a lot of classical music in there. There was pantomime. Yeah, there was humor. There was fun. There was Phil's influence, which was big band orientated. So you had the accents. You had Buddy Rich meets Vaughan Williams. And I think the nearest American equivalent to that would be Jimmy Webb. We loved the songs of Jimmy Webb, and I still do.
Those are some fantastic descriptions, and it made me think. Just as a final note on the really pioneering production, and you described it really well, and the kind of stagecraft that you guys employed. Were there ever some comical malfunctions that you look back on and think, man, that didn't really work out so well, or just because when you're using that kind of gear, it could be. Cause I've had, or whether it's Earth, Wind and Fire and their bassist getting stuck up in the light set, or Gene Simmons doing the same sort of thing. A lot of people have tried different kinds of things to augment the performance, and sometimes they don't always work so well.
Well, I think in terms of the things that can break down, going back to 1971, sometimes the Mellotron would break down, or we literally couldn't get it up the stairs at a particular gig, so the gig would get cancelled. It was a big beast, a bit like you need four men with the Mark II, one on each corner to lift it. That's how it works. So it's a bit like pole bearers at at a funeral. But, when the beast deigned to fly, it was extraordinary.
Well, talking about extraordinary and turning our attention more to you and your technique, I always enjoyed your guitar playing, but in researching your guitar tapping technique, which you started using really, really early on, it turns out Eddie Van Halen would go on to incorporate that in his style, and what I understand is he's credited with first being exposed to that by seeing early Genesis with you.
Well, it's very interesting. I've never met Eddie, but he is obviously a fine player. There's no doubting that, and there's so much joy in his playing. Terrific. But I think I came up with that. I was trying to play something vaguely similar to Carter Fugue, one little phrase from it, and again, we're back to Bach here, and I thought the best way to do this is on one string. And I thought, I wonder if I could play this in time. And I found out that I could. And not only could you play in time, but you could also play very, very fast like this. So it was faster than the plectrum. It was a whole other technique, and it's become part of the language of guitar playing, particularly for shredders. For guys who like to play very, very fast, tapping is a perfect way of sometimes you can play so fast you won't be able to hear in normal time the amount of notes that are being served up. You'd have to slow it down to be able to hear just how many notes were being triggered. And so it is a fabulous technique, and there are many people who do it really, really well.
What you point out, though, Steve, is also another interesting thing. You're saying that this technique went on to be something that shredders would tend to use. Another interesting connection to the hard rock world is that you guys, despite the fact that you weren't really a hard rock band at all, there were some heavier passages occasionally, but it was really different than that. But yet, all these years later, whether it's Yngwie Malmsteen, Queensryche, Fate's Warning, there are so many hard-rocking, heavy bands that now, when you interview them, like Jeff Tate from Queensryche, he'll give full credit to the early Genesis for inspiring both Queensryche and his solo career. So it's fascinating how much, in particular, the heavy metal world has been influenced by what you guys did in Genesis in the 70s.
It's funny that, isn't it? I mean, when you set out, you don't intend for it to go that way. It's just one of those things, and I'm pleased that technique has taken off. I think there are so many tricks that you can employ with the guitar. You don't have to drive the string with a plectrum. There are many ways of doing it. There are other techniques I've experimented with, and sometimes those things are with acoustic guitar, because the acoustic guitar can do all sorts of things that you wouldn't expect that it can manage, and that's another really wonderful sound as well. Aloha, this is Steve Hackett from Genesis. You're listening to my very good friend Dave Lawrence.
Steve, I really hope you had fun talking today. I hope this wasn't a hassle.
I certainly did, yeah. Very nice talking to you. And I hope to visit Hawaii. I know my wife would love to come. So.
Oh, we'd love to have you. Love to have you and talk some more.
Look so much.
Well, I really appreciate getting to excuse me. I really appreciate getting to talk to you today. It meant a lot.
Thank you.
And
thank you so much.
All the best to you. Be safe, brother.
All the best to you. Okay.
Aloha.
Stay well. Cheers.
Cheers.
Bye-bye.